This report is really disturbing. He failed his vetting, first of all, at Kent Police, but then went on to become a community police officer. But this actually gave him the same kit, the same ability to arrest, the same sort of protections, one could say, the same level of public trust as a normal police officer. How? How could this have happened?
Well, how could it have happened? I mean, let's not forget that he was in debt, and that was on his first application, and that should have been a huge red flag. And you talk about red flag seems to be prevalent across policing, and it seems to be a theme and a pattern of behaviour that's missed across policing, which just indicates what a culture there is embedded within policing, that these type of behaviours that others will see as banter and as a laugh and a joke amongst lads, then transpire to this horrific incident and crime. I tell you, I read the statement this morning from the family, and if any police officer reads that statement, if you don't cry for what you read from what the family is saying, it's heartbreaking, then you shouldn't be a police officer.
Well, Shabnam, you know, what are we talking about here? I mean, I know for a fact that as of about a year ago, I don't know whether they've raised their game so far, but most police recruits to the Met were not even personally interviewed. They just fill in a form, and if it ticks all the right boxes, they're in. That's ridiculous. I hope they've ended that system. I hope that every recruit gets personally interviewed. Otherwise, who knows who's going to get into the police force? You'll get more and more Wayne Couzens, won't you? But as a former detective, detective superintendent, but you worked for Scotland Yard at for 30 years. What are we talking about? Are we talking about, obviously, coppers, I think, looking after themselves, but more than that, maybe a lad's culture? As a woman who worked there, did you experience that?
Well, look, misogyny, racism was the norm back in my early days of policing, and I think the Macpherson review and the inquiry there highlighted that many years later. Fast forward that to the Casey review, which was initiated after the murder of Sarah Everard. Same and similar behaviours that have been identified, so very little has changed. I will give Mark some credit in that there's certainly been an uplift in the significant amount of police officers who are being suspended, who have been restricted, or who are being investigated and convicted of serious crimes. But what that tells you is that the vetting process is so broken and so flawed, which is why they're being allowed in. So you've actually got this problem twofold. You've got the vetting processes where thousands of officers have come into the organisation without even a face-to-face to a certain degree. And then tick boxes where if you're asked, are you a neo-Nazi or are you affiliated to them? Do you watch pornography or anything like that?
Yeah, like they're going to go, yes.
Well, they tick a box.
I'm a neo-Nazi
no.
and I love extreme porn.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're going to say that,
they'll,
aren't they?
They'll tick the box that says no, and that's the end of it.
Yeah,
There's no fact-finding.
Ridiculous.
You know, back in the day when I joined, they'd come to your home address. They'd come and they'd do a face-to-face interview. They'd look at the neighbourhood that you're living in. They'll do checks on all your family to see who's living in your home. I recall police officers had to move out if there were, you know, members of their family that were criminals. Now, they shouldn't be punished for that, but they were told, you can't live with that member of your family. So those kind of policing processes around vetting, the real deep dives into those that are coming in need to be dealt with. The second...
Are you saying, Shabnam, sorry to interrupt, but are you saying what I just said, that they're still letting coppers into the police force who have not been personally interviewed?
Without a doubt.
Jeez.
They're being interviewed, but they're not being vetted to the degree that they need to be vetted in. And I think that, you know, cutbacks have made a huge amount of difference. But when you had COVID, this changed the dynamics of policing and the dynamics of how they do the vetting. What they did after that, I think, was use it as an excuse. Actually, we don't need to use our resources. We can deploy the resources elsewhere, and we can do this tick box system. And then you've got the likes of Wayne Couzens, and you've got David Carrick. Remember, these two worked within and under the same
Don't forget
command.
what Wayne Couzens' nickname among his police mates was, the rapist. That was his nickname.
And David Carrick had a name that I won't repeat on
Similar,
here either.
yeah.
Last week only, a serving officer, former officer, was sacked and convicted of several rapes. He came into the police not that long after the whole situation with Sarah Everard occurred, and there'd been allegations against him.
It was 13 rapes. 13 rapes.
13 rapes. He was then convicted of a rape that was no further action. So there was some real serious questions for Sir Mark to answer. He cannot just arrest his way out of a situation. The biggest problem he has is not just the dirty, rotten apples, but changing the culture and the behaviours of officers. I'm not going to deny there are thousands of really good, hard-working officers, but you only need a few that actually make it really, really difficult for the rest of them. And that is where the trust and confidence is absolutely rock bottom and broken. My heart breaks for the family of Sarah Everard today.
Yeah, Shabnam, I can see you getting emotional about that. I think we should reflect on what the family has said. This is their statement. It is obvious Wayne Couzens should never have been a police officer. While holding a position of trust, in reality, he was a serial sex offender. We believe Sarah died because he was a police officer. She would never have gotten into a stranger's car. We strongly support recommendations and trust they will be implemented. We no longer wait for her call. We no longer expect to see her. We know she won't be there at family gatherings, but the desperate longing to have her with us remains, and the loss of Sarah pervades every part of our lives.
That is very powerful, very powerful.
It's when you put people into the context of this, when you take away the facts and statistics and the debates and remember what happened, that it does. I mean, as a woman, it makes me very upset to think about that poor girl. But you wonder, actually, if all police officers had to hand in their devices for scrutiny, as you would do if you were joining the intelligence services, quite how many would pass the threshold?
I think that's another problem within policing. I think what happens is people get into these little WhatsApp groups, they get a relationship amongst the colleagues that they've got, and they think they're in a safe environment. They're not. They're not. I've got nephews in the police service. I constantly tell them, do not engage in that kind of behaviour. And if you hear it, you see it, you call it out. And I think that's another big challenge, is where people have to have the courage to actually speak out. He did that to Sarah Everard's family. He did that to thousands and thousands of women across the UK who don't have the trust in the police. And he did that alone. But he did that because he was allowed to get away with those red flag behaviours. He was allowed to behave in a certain way that was ignored, not challenged, and a failure of the leadership to actually address those issues.